You're listening to Puma Podcast.
Hi, I'm Carl Sayat, Puma Podcast. You're listening to Teka Teka News. Every third Saturday of September, volunteers from around the world come together for International Coastal Cleanup Day. The Philippines has constantly been ranked among the top participating countries, and we owe this growing empathy for our waters to the marine biologists and scientists who teach us the value of marine life. The late Dr. Miguel Fortes was one of these marine scientists whose work shined a light on nature's ordinary designs and revealed their extraordinary importance. In 2021, we had the honor of interviewing him for the podcast Climate-smart Fisheries. In this podcast, experts discuss Asia-Pacific's marine ecosystems and how they protect us from climate change. We'll share a snippet of this conversation about seagrass. How does it sustain local communities, whether through food, livelihood, or disaster preparedness? Let's listen in.
Seagrass makes up one of the most overlooked ecosystems in the world. And unlike colorful coral reefs or flashy sea creatures, seagrass seems so plain until you get to know more about it. We invited a blue carbon specialist to tell us what's so remarkable about seagrass. And don't worry, we will explain blue carbon later.
I'm Miguel Fortes, a retired professor of marine science. I am collating all the world's communities of practice involving seagrass. Seagrass are flowering plants. We are very familiar with the cogon or shorter grasses. They really are like that. But basically, they complete their life history submerged in the sea, especially in the shallow parts.
Actually, seagrass exists all over the world. But the region with the most concentrated amount of seagrass species is Southeast Asia. In fact, you can find 1/3 of the world's seagrass species in the Philippines. Despite its abundance in the country, many Filipinos cannot tell the difference between seagrass and the more popular seaweed, such as the eucuma and the Capophycus species, which is eaten as a side dish along with grilled octopus, fish, and meat. So, what's the difference?
Flowering plant, the seagrass. Seaweeds are not flowering plants. The two are entirely different.
And if I may add, seaweeds are a form of algae. But seagrass have leaves, roots, and veins, and they even produce seeds. But Dr. Fortes, what are some other misconceptions that people may have about seagrass?
That it is practically of no use. It's because it's not very attractive like the coral reef, not as useful as the mangrove. And then, of course, that a seagrass has no relationship with the other ecosystems, with the coral reef and the mangroves. But in reality, it is the ecotone or the transition point, the link between the coral reef, the mangroves, and the seagrass because it is the middle ecosystem. Especially, seagrass is where most of the fish that we eat, the commercially important ones, that is where they spawn.
Let's unpack there. First of all, you mentioned that seagrass beds serve as habitat for marine animals. Tell us more about that.
As nursery especially, and on the surfaces of the seagrasses, there are so many organisms that grow, epiphytes, plants and animals. And these are the food of fish, of invertebrates, like urchins, even dugong turtle. So you have this as a source of food, nursery. But in a nursery, it's not just food that is being provided to you. It's also protection. One species of seagrass that we have very common in the Philippines is the taroktok. Now, that is a very effective hiding place for the young so that the predators, the bigger fish, cannot see them when they hide among the leaves.
But how do they benefit the human communities in coastal areas?
It's so easy to get food from a seagrass bed. early morning, in many places, you see many people go down to the beach, rocky shore at low tide with pails because they collect invertebrates, the juvenile fish, seaweeds, shells. Whole family does that, and right there they have their breakfast of seaweed, of fish, of shells. And then in few places in Cebu, they make use of some species of seagrass in handicraft, which of course adds to their livelihood income. So food, materials, and even more recent discoveries, chemists have found some very useful compounds, antibacterial, for example, growing in the surface of seagrasses.
But that's not the only thing seagrass are capable of. They also protect coastal communities from floods, typhoons, and other natural calamities, yes?
Yeah, for example, in a community fronting the sea, you have the seagrasses, you have the coral reefs, and you have the mangroves. So all of the three ecosystems are the lines of defense, especially in relation to tsunami, tidal waves, strong waves, and wind. Coral reef is the first line of defense. It's the first line that is really preventing very strong waves. But if there are no coral reefs, the seagrass assume that function. And if there are no seagrasses, then the mangroves assume that function.
And that would be especially important when it comes to climate change.
Blue carbon is the carbon that is captured or sequestered by coastal habitats. Seagrasses are very effective in capturing carbon in carbon dioxide, cleaning the air that we breathe. That amount of seagrass captures 20 million metric tons of carbon per year. Can you imagine that amount? 20 million metric tons. And if you try to extend it further, that is equivalent to the amount of carbon that is being released by 270,000 cars running in the roads of the Philippines.
That's why seagrass is called the lungs of the sea, because like other plants, it absorbs carbon dioxide and releases oxygen into the environment, in this case, into the bodies of water where they thrive. The problem is people continue to destroy seagrass for different reasons. Every 30 minutes, we lose seagrass beds the size of a football field globally. Resorts, households, and hotels keep dumping their laundry washings, for example. And the elements and chemicals in these flow to the sea in such large amounts, they can kill fish and seagrass.
Be sure to catch the rest of this conversation by looking for Climate-smart Fisheries on your favorite podcast app. Climate-smart Fisheries is brought to you by RARE, a conservation NGO that supports local governments, national agencies, and communities in promoting climate resilience in coastal fisheries management. It was part of RARE's Fishing for Climate Resilience project, supported by Germany's Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation, and Nuclear Safety through the International Climate Initiative. Its episode on seagrass was hosted by Robbie Alampay, produced by Macy Joven, with Rare Philippines' Yasmin Akiza and Angel Yuson. It was edited by Nico Bolante. And that was today's episode of Teka Teka News. Again, I'm Carl Sayat, Puma Podcast. This episode was produced by Marco Azurin. It was edited by Pidoy Blanco. Maraming salamat po.